The wind cut across the open plains like a cold knife, dragging with it the smell of snow and the silence of a land that had long ago swallowed the weak. Evelyn Hart pulled the thin, brown shawl tighter around her shoulders as she trudged through the half-frozen mud, her boots soaked, her breath a ragged puff of steam in the dying light. She had not eaten in nearly 2 days and had not slept beneath a roof in 5. The storm clouds were gathering fast behind her, heavy and gray, threatening to bury the land beneath a night of white and ice. She knew she wouldn't survive one more night out there, not with a chill already sinking into her bones. And the last of her courage fraying like old twine. For months she had traveled west with a wagon family she barely knew, working for scraps, trading silence for safety, until the fever took the mother, greed took the father, and the world once again took everything else. She had always been taught that a woman's place was to endure, quietly, politely, invisibly, but endurance had its limits, and hers had been burned away with hunger, betrayal, and cold. The ranch came into sight through the curtain of snow, just a smudge of dark wood and smoke on a white horizon. She hadn't even meant to walk in that direction. Her legs simply carried her toward the smell of horses and warmth, like some dying animal seeking a final mercy. The split-rail fence was rimmed with ice, and the barn roof sagged under the gathering flakes. The cabin itself stood solid but isolated, far from any town, road, or neighbor. That kind of solitude usually meant one of two things: danger or safety, and Evelyn was too desperate to care which. She crossed the yard slowly, her eyes catching the orange flicker in the cabin window, the only sign of life. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from the knowledge that this was the last door she could knock on before the world simply closed hers forever. The man who opened the door did not speak at first. He stood in the frame, broad-shouldered and tall, wearing a dark coat that looked worn but strong, his hair brushing his jaw in messy waves, a scar carved across his left cheek, pale against the olive tone of his skin, disappearing into the stubble at his jaw. His eyes, an unreadable gray, flickered over her quickly, her torn dress, the mud-stained hem, the cracked lips, the trembling hands. She had seen that look before. Men measuring what was left of a woman, deciding whether she was worth helping, hurting, or ignoring. But this man's eyes did not roam with hunger or disdain, only calculation, and something buried beneath it that she could not yet name. He didn't step aside to let her in, nor did he shut the door in her face. He simply waited, like he had learned long ago that words should never be wasted on guesswork. Evelyn's voice faltered and she swallowed hard, trying again. Sir, I ain't here to steal or beg or cause trouble. If you turn me away, I'll die before sunrise. That's the truth of it. Her fingers clutched the shawl as she spoke, as though it were the last thing tethering her to the earth. The man remained still, his breath slow and quiet. The cold air whipped around her legs, creeping up beneath the dress like tiny knives. She took a shallow breath and forced the rest out before courage failed her. I can work, she said, voice shaking but determined. Clean, cook, mend, whatever needs doing. I don't want charity. I'll trade myself for shelter, for food, however you see fit. Just don't send me back out in that storm. His expression didn't change, but something in his shoulders eased just barely. A gust of wind shoved at her back, sending flakes into her hair and eyes, and she swayed on her feet. The man stepped aside then, not dramatically, not graciously, just enough space for her to pass. Inside, he said quietly, voice rough like gravel left out in the sun. Evelyn hesitated only a moment before stumbling across the threshold, the warmth of the fire washing over her like a memory she had nearly forgotten. The interior was plain, a single-room cabin with a stone hearth, a sturdy table, 2 chairs, and a bed pushed back into the corner where the shadow softened its edges. A pot of something simmered over the flames, and the smell of it made her stomach twist with need. She didn't move further than the door, unsure if stepping too far would break whatever mercy she'd been granted. The man closed the door behind her and brushed the snow from his coat, without looking at her. Sit, he said, nodding toward the chair nearest the fire. She obeyed without argument, her legs nearly buckling with relief as she sank onto the wooden seat. She pressed her hands close to the heat, trying not to flinch as the blood began to move again. The man ladled stew from the pot into a tin bowl and set it on the table in front of her. He didn't offer a spoon, so she used her hands, hardly chewing. Too hungry to pretend at manners, he watched in silence for a while, leaning one shoulder against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. When she had eaten enough to keep the ache at bay, she wiped her hands with the edge of her skirt and finally asked, "What do I call you?" The man seemed almost surprised by the question, as though he'd long forgotten the need for names. After a pause, he answered, "Colt Maddox." He didn't ask for her name in return, but she gave it anyway. "Evelyn." He nodded once, like that was sufficient, and returned his gaze to the window, where the snow now fell heavy and fast. The silence between them was not comfortable, but it was not cruel either. She could feel the weight of his solitude in the stillness of the room, in the way his eyes rarely moved, in how everything inside the cabin had a place and purpose but no softness. He looked like a man who had long decided that loneliness was easier to manage than disappointment. The scar on his cheek wasn't fresh, but the story behind it felt alive in the set of